Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Band. Welcome to the Daily Edge on the Place Your Trades Network. We are the network that focuses on trading daily options using the CME Group's event contracts to trade indices, energies, metals, and now Bitcoin. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Tradeovate, which has built a custom app dedicated to trading CME Group's event contracts. And you can trade them on the custom app or using the Dome on the main Tradeovate platform, which I will show you a little bit. So the thing that I would love to share with you right now is a little bit about, hello, that doesn't belong there, a little bit about the Place Your Trades website, which you're looking at right now. Dennis and I will be getting started. I'm so excited to have him share some of his knowledge. It's been incredible talking to him about this stuff. But I do want to tell you that no matter what you trade, you can't come to the site and read the stats that have been put up by InvestorQuant. And they tell us if the day opens above the close, then the probability of closing above the open has this space. And so you can come in every day and say, all right, you're going to be looking from 50 to 60% probability. And if it opens down, you can buy the market and likely close above the open. So these stats are really, really great. Today, the dip down is saying that it will likely hold above the open. Ideally, you can come in and look for about 61%, and it'll help you out. Now, here is one of my favorite toys. These look at the event contracts and the futures in terms of looking at them. And these event contracts are simply yes or no's in terms of where we think the market will go. So right now we are at 41.94 in the ES. And so we can say, hey, if I don't think it's going to close, I can say no and place an event contract, purchase it for 7. If I think yes, I can purchase it for 13.50, hold to the end of the day with the maximum payout at 20. And so this is a great way to understand how the market works in these particular spaces. I do want to show you a little bit about how you can follow the price history of these contracts and where people are coming in and how the prices are moving. This is the actual future, and this is the no contract, and this is the yes contract. This is provided to us by Quick Strike, and it is not available anywhere else just like this. It is created just for us, and I'd love for you to take a peek at it. It's got all kinds of information. Whether you trade event contracts or not, this is certainly a place to see what an undercurrent looks like. So with that being said, I would love to bring in my friend and certainly someone that I deeply respect because of his ability to understand news flow. It is Dennis Dick, Triple D Trader from Pre-Market Prep. You can find him there also on Twitter, sharing all kinds of information. Welcome, Dennis. We were talking a bit ago.
Thanks for having me, Anne-Marie.
I'm delighted. You've been trading since 96 and 99 professionally, and you have really morphed into a space where the market finds the edge for you as an individual. So from scalping in the early days to Citadel taking over that sort of intraday space to where you sit now with news flow, tell us about what draws you to news flow and how you see the power in it from day to day. Maybe starting with one, what drew you to it, and then how you set up before and after the market closes.
Yeah, so I've probably become a news flow trader, specialized in that maybe the last 10 years. And it's evolution more than anything. One thing, I've often talked to other traders about is what, is adapting to your current environment and continue to adapt. And if I look at what I was doing back in 1999 when I started with Bright Trading, it is completely different than what I'm doing today in 2023. And that's just slow evolution of trading strategies. So if I take you back to the early days of Bright Trading in Detroit in 1999, we were what was called filter traders. And what we were doing was looking for big bids in the market, reading the level 2, finding institutional size and trying to get ahead of that and saying, hey, here's a big fish, this is going to move. And, we'd buy ahead of that and hope that the institutional trader continues to pay up for it. Doing a lot of, market making type strategies as well, where, we're sitting on the bed, getting on the offer, trying to make a few cents here and a few cents there. And that's all changed. That all changed basically with Reg NMS in 2007. And then, the markets have changed. And now it's moved, where market making and some of these shorter term strategies are all done by high frequency traders like your Citadel and your Virtue. And they kind of pushed us out of that space. So what we did at Bright Trading, some traders obviously didn't adapt and they're probably no longer with the firm. Traders that did adapt extended their time horizon just slightly. So we went from trading in seconds or, milliseconds, seconds to minutes or even hours, becoming more pure day traders. So, and moving that along to news flow, I mean, there's edges in certain pockets of this market where the high frequency traders are more scared to trade. And I do believe there are some algorithmic traders that do trade news flow very well. But I also believe there's, the human, brain working on the interpretation of news is still superior in many instances to the algorithms that are running on these news headlines. So I think we've got quite a few decent traders at Bright Trading that still specialize in trading headlines. And, there's a myth out there, and it's very incorrect, that if you focus on headlines too much, you can't be successful at that. And it's just not the case. I mean, again, headlines are only one tool in your toolbox, but news interpretation, if you can get good at that, there's not that much competition in that. You don't see people coming out and writing news interpretation books, and you don't see people, preaching on, well, here's, it's just an area where there isn't a lot of other, competition, and that's what draws me to it. So I probably became more of a news flow trader just to move away from where I was 20 years ago from traditional market making type strategies to more like news interpretation where you're getting big moves. And again, you've got to be able to stomach some big losses too when you're doing news interpretation, but there's good opportunities, and that's probably why we started pre-market prep and and looking at after hours action, because a lot of those individual headlines don't break during the regular session. They break pre-market or they break after hours.
Wow, that's a lot of information there. So one of the big questions I wanted to ask you from that are, a lot of us aren't very good at interpreting news flow against a backdrop of the movement for risk on and risk off. So first, when you are looking at that, you have that backdrop of, hey, is this a risk on, risk off? Tell me what makes you look at the day, the macro day, and go, this is a risk on day or this is a risk off day?
And I mean, this is a great question, and there's multiple answers here. But what you have to consider is when the market, and let's take us back to March, when you're in a macro-driven market, and we were in March, the market was tanking. We had regional bank crisis basically happening, where we saw multiple banks fail, KRE going from 60 to 46 in a matter of 3 days. I mean, this was, a market, the VIX became elevated. This was a market that was driven by the macro headlines. And what happens is, in those environments, little individual stories don't matter as much. I mean, what's it matter if this company's doing good, if the bank that they're with is going to fail? So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but some markets are driven by macro headlines and some markets are driven by more individual stock stories. And typically when you're in a really big bear market where they're just selling everything, those individual stories get lost. What happens though is once the markets stabilize, you do have up movements. Even in individual bear markets, you have periods of bull markets as well. And I think, news flow actually works better in periods where there's overall market stability and those individual stories matter. And why is that? Because there's more risk. People, traders are taking on more risk. They're looking for more opportunities. They're more active. In March, they're just protecting capital and they're scared. They're not going to take an actionable headline and say, I'm going to buy this because, well, what if PAC-W or what if FRC is going down? That headline is meaningless. So we're back in today to a market environment where the VIX has come off a little bit, significantly under 20, and you're getting into more normalized markets where headlines do matter again. They didn't matter as much in March, except that they were coming from a regional bank, but they absolutely matter, these little individual stock stories, when we come to the market that we're in today. And right now, the headline that is driving stocks the most is anything to do with AI. So anything. If you've got an AI headline, it's a driver. And Tesla may just be the best example from the last 5 days. Obviously, the famous David Faber Musk interview on CNBC from last week, where David Faber interviewed, and it was watched by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. It was a fabulous interview, and you learned a lot about Elon Musk from that interview. But what I took from it, was that Tesla, which was probably had been down for March and April, May, and wasn't getting a lot of love. What Musk said in that interview, one thing to change the narrative was he talked about Tesla as an AI company. He talked about Tesla as this, with this autonomous drive, and he talked about, autonomous drive being a year to a year and a half out. Now, he has said this before, so is he going to execute on what he's talking about? At this point in time, it doesn't matter. It just matters that he changed the narrative for the stock. He changed the narrative from Tesla being viewed as, oh, it's an EV company, obviously EV, it's the leader in EV. And then people now seeing as, well, no, this is an AI company, because if he does execute on the autonomous drive, then, this becomes one of the biggest AI companies out there. So I think it changed the narrative to investors towards Tesla. And if we look since that Elon Musk interview, the stock was around 166 that day. The stock has went up straight up about 25 points. So, interpretation of these headlines is very important. And sometimes it's just, if something's watched by the masses, it can change the entire narrative on the stock. And that's really what Tesla did.
So when you come in and you look at something like this, and of course, these sorts of AI things are what's driving the Qs to be, up 18% over the last 6 months, and far more from the beginning of the year, right? It's something up like 20 or something like that. So when you see these sorts of things coming into this particular space and you think, wow, or do you think this might be overheated? Where is there space where you go, yeah, that's run up pretty hot, pretty fast. The next piece of news maybe isn't going to drive it quite as fast. What makes you go, time to turn the tap off there, time to take some profit?
I think this is where your technical skills can come into play. So I think a lot of times the catalyst for me initiating a trade isn't so much chart. It's maybe a headline, it's maybe the flow. But then when you're looking after you've initiated, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's look at the chart and see, where does the stock kind of want to go? And if you bring up the Tesla chart here right now, you can see all the massive resistance at 200. So anywhere from like 197 to 200 would be a natural selling area for that stock, because that's where it's had trouble before. It's a big run up. It's run up 25 points in basically 5 straight days. So you could maybe ring the register today and say, I'm not going to sit around for the last 6 or 7 points, or maybe you bring your stop up a little bit here. But you can kind of see that this stock looks like it wants to at least try to get to that 200. So I think you've got to combine it. And I always talk about tools in your toolbox, and obviously news flow. Benzinga Pro is a great spot to get the press releases from, obviously. But there's tools in your toolbox, and news flow is one, but technical analysis is another one too. So I think a lot of times when you're on the right side of a trade, it's not a bad idea to take the 90-day chart, look at a chart. And I think the 90-day is the most underutilized chart out there, because it gives you a feel for where the stock has been, what's trending. I mean, it's the first chart I look at. If I don't know a stock, I'm looking at the 90-day chart. And if you look at the 90-day chart on Tesla, you can clearly see struggled up there in March, kind of snuck up there in April as a fake out, and then we sold off from there. So it's a logical stopping point for it. So, another 6 or 7 points, and I think the trade starts to get seriously exhausted.
So when you sit in the space of news flow and you go, okay, here's a piece of news. Let's say that you have an expectation of a move in one direction. And so you initiate the trade, but the market begins to move in another direction. What sorts of things tell you this is not within expectation and I need to cut and run?
Yeah, well, even worse, sometimes it's not even a market factor. Sometimes it's a misinterpretation of the news. And I mean, as a trader, if you're interpreting news headlines, there's going to be moments in time where you've misinterpreted. And I think what I understand as a news flow trader is you want immediate gratification. You don't want to sit and say, well, they're wrong, market's wrong and they're interpreting this wrong. I mean, if I'm trading on a headline and the headline's just broken the last couple of minutes and the stock isn't doing what it's expected to do off of that headline, it means I've either misinterpreted it or the market doesn't care. In either scenario, you've got to be cutting out of those very quickly. So if you're trading headlines, you almost need immediate gratification. You can't wait for your story to work itself out because sometimes that story just might not work itself out at all. Now, again, you've got to give it time because when a press release breaks on your Benzinga Pro, CNBC is running so many other things that the masses probably don't have that press release yet. So it's not a matter of like, okay, it didn't move in the first minute, I got to wait. CNBC may be covering this in the next 5 or 10 minutes. It takes time for them they're doing other things. And when CNBC covers something, it moves. I call it the CNBC effect. And if all of a sudden, a lot of times you'll see the stock not doing much on a headline, all of a sudden CNBC covers it and then it goes because the masses now know. So, I mean, a lot of times you get that edge by jumping in, on a headline that you feel should have some movement. And then it's covered on CNBC and then it actually goes. So sometimes you got to actually wait. And I'm not talking on news flow that you always have to just be in and out and, on the headline the first 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes you can hold these things for, a few days. If the Tesla trades 5-6 days into it now. So that was a longer term narrative that had changed. But I mean, there's, when you're trading news, there are going to be trades that are not going to work out. And the one thing when you are wrong, and what I've tried to specialize in my 23 years, is minimizing damage when you are wrong and maximizing, your return when you are correct. And that's what will define whether you're going to be successful or not if you're in the news interpretation business. So you've got to be quick to identify that, hey, I've interpreted this wrong. I'm on the wrong side of the trade. How do I minimize the damage? Is it just hitting the bid? Is it waiting for, the eventual little pop back up, check back up? There's different ways to minimize the damage. But sometimes, if you're on the wrong side, even like with some drug news, sometimes you'll see a pop on the news and all of a sudden they tank it. I mean, sometimes, these things just don't work out the way you think. Or you get an earnings announcement and the stock misses and it tanks and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to go down. And then all of a sudden starts rip roaring and coming back. I mean, you've got to, obviously, if it's not working out, sometimes it's just that, maybe the environment is conducive to be buying these dips. Maybe it was all priced in. There's a lot of things to consider when you're trading news. It's not just a matter of, and this is probably why the algos struggle with it so much, because it's so much gray area. There's so much, like, is there sentiment strong going into the report? Is the sentiment weak coming into the report? Is the sentiment, strong going into the news event? I mean, there's so many different things. Is the news event random? Was it scheduled? Like there's all those things to consider. So I think the algos struggle with all that. And I think that's why, and don't kid yourself, there's still algos that are trading on news, but they try to trade the black and white stuff, like stock upgraded, they buy, stock downgraded, they sell. I mean, that's pretty black and white. When you get into earnings, it's an interpretation thing. And, you have, it's a beat, and they buy, and then all of a sudden they pull the rug out from under it. And sometimes like, well, yeah, but they're beat, but this stock's been a huge downtrend. There's all bag holders in here. So any type of rally they're looking to get out on to get their money back. And that can turn it the other way. So, I mean, there's all these factors to consider when you're going in. And that's why, as a human being, if you learn the art of news trading, there's still a huge edge there.
I love that. And certainly you have built a huge edge. I got to see some of those pictures of that magnificent home you just finished building with the
Uh-huh.
awesome views. And so congratulations
Oh, thank you.
on the success of that. I absolutely love where that house is. It's just
Oh, thank you.
fantastic.
Yeah,
And
it
so,
was a project, and
yeah.
don't build a house during COVID because you blow the budget apart. I say I'm a very good trader and I'm a very bad house builder. The then result was very nice, but I tell you, it was supposed to be here, and it ended up here on the cost. So
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I joke that I'm now broke. Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. What I do take away from what you're saying is that this particular strength of yours has a lot of finesse. And if someone wanted to go through the space where they began to really understand news flow in its big picture, I think that would be really huge, because all we are bombarded by every single day is news, 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 news,
Yeah.
news, news. And then how we really function in terms of interpreting that, I think it'd be a super skill to develop, especially since AI has trouble with it at the present time, because
Yeah.
there's so many strings to pull on. So if someone wanted to learn that and wanted to get better at that, where would you tell them to start? Is it more observation?
Yeah, it is.
Talk about
It's
that.
observation and getting your feet wet and starting small and feeling it out. When you're trading headlines and they're risky, I always am trading. If I'm trading the leader, it's with smaller size. Sometimes I'm trading the laggards though. Like, okay, we've got a good, headline here in this industry. This is going to pull up, the sympathy plays. There may be some more where you can size up a little bit more. But when you're trading the actual catalyst, like that's where you've got to be careful, because there's just the liquidity drops substantially. So when you're wrong, it's sometimes very hard to get out too. So
It's
there's just
nice.
maybe, especially in the
Yeah.
pre-market after hours. I mean, there can be some instances, smaller cap stocks, where there's no bids. So I'm like, well, you got to wait it out then. Like, if there's no bids, there's nothing you can do. Don't panic. And the worst thing you can do when you're on the wrong side is start offering it down, because now you're just making your stock look weaker and you're bringing in more sellers. Like, the worst thing you could possibly do is start panicking and offering it down, because in all likelihood, you're going to end up selling the bottom. So sometimes you just got to say, I'm on the wrong side of it. I'm going to have to wait for the liquidity at 9:30. If you're in something thin, you're in something like Bank America, AMD, these things are thick enough that you can always get in and out. It seems like, at any time of the day, including the pre-market and after hours. So it depends the type of stock you're trading as well.
So how do you keep your head focused so you don't, end up being on tilt? Is there,
Yeah,
how
I'm
do you
looking
tell
for
yourself?
headlines. Like, I'm looking for the headline. So it's like you get so much, and you said it right. You get bombarded with so many headlines. It's like you've got to be able to know what you're looking for too. So you can look at your Benzinga Pro, and there's headlines getting dropped here like every multiples every minute. So you've got to be able to like go through and interpret kind of what you're looking for. And what am I looking for at this time? It's anything to do with AI. I mean, Uber was a good example this morning. It didn't catch, and I'm not really sure why it didn't. Maybe it's the kind of day we're having here today. I was very surprised this one didn't. I talked about this in the pre-market prep show this morning. Uber had a headline that broke at 8 a. I believe it was 8 a.m. But they were talking about partnering up on autonomous drive with another company. So with Waymo, and Uber did pop on this. Like, I don't know if you can show the chart, but Uber did pop from about $39 up to $40 in pre-market. I kind of thought it would have follow through, but it didn't. It never got a lot of coverage, though. I never even seen them talk about it on CNBC. So it kind of just snuck through. And maybe there was other things to talk about today, but it never got a lot of coverage. And, I don't know, like with Waymo, how, while their technology is, talking about their autonomous vehicle technology, working with Uber, I'm not sure all those details, but it's a kind of headline that I'd be looking for. It's kind of headline
Mhm.
that surprised me that it didn't catch more than it did. And I did try to trade it, and basically it really didn't work out, because it went up a little bit from where I bought it, and then it pulled back, and it's kind of in the same spot almost was where I bought it here this morning. So it really didn't work out. But there's sometimes they just don't work out. I mean, for whatever reason, the headline didn't catch. But right now I'm looking for anything to do with AI. I'm obviously looking for, there's other headlines that are just, like a stock gets upgraded. Sure, it can have an influence. But then you've got to understand different types of upgrades. Is it upgraded as like an analyst chasing the price, and the stock just had a good earnings and they're just chasing up? Because those upgrades are almost meaningless. Or is it a contrarian call where stock's been trending down, and now it gets a vote of confidence from like a Goldman Sachs, and that can turn the narrative in the short term. That can be a lot more influential than some analysts just chasing price. So even within, an upgrade is not equal to another upgrade. Who's upgrading it? What is the reason they're upgrading? Is it a momentum or contrarian call? Because those matter as well. And they're going to be worth different amounts. Is it upgrade to buy or is it upgrade to neutral? Is it, downgrade to sell? Because anytime they downgrade to sell, that always moves stocks because you don't see analysts doing that as often. Today, for instance, we had Nucor getting underway from JP Morgan, big brokerage firm, what pretty widely followed stock, and they're telling you to sell because when they say underweight, that's equivalent to sell. So that catches people and will move stocks. And if you look, Nucor this morning's down $3.71, which seems about right. So I mean, there's all types of things you've got to learn as you go. So don't just expect to jump in, because anything with news flow is not black and white for the most part. It's more gray, and it's up to interpretation. I still think that's why the human has an edge. Oops. And I believe Anne-Marie has just stepped away here. She may have lost connection, there's telling me. So I believe I'm still going here. So hopefully Anne-Marie will come back. But if not, I'll just thank everybody for listening here today, obviously. And if you want to see more or learn more about the types of strategies that we do, you can find us on Benzinga's Pre-Market Prep. We also have our own channel, premarketprep.com, where we've got some educational videos where you can learn more about news flow trading, you can learn more about different types of statistical arbitrage, different types of strategies, moving away from just traditional technical analysis. So if you're interested, premarketprep.com, also Pre-Market Prep on the Benzinga news site. But it appears that Anne-Marie has lost connection here just briefly. So thanks everyone for listening here today, and we'll see you 8 a.m. on Pre-Market Prep tomorrow.